The 12 Men by G.K. Chesterton. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honour of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The 12 Men. The other day, while I was meditating on morality and Mr. H. Pitt, I was, so to speak, snatched up and put into a jury box to try people. The snatching took some weeks, but to me it seemed something sudden and arbitrary. I was put into this box because I lived in Battersea, and my name began with a C. Looking round me, I saw that there were also summoned and in attendance in the court whole crowds and processions of men, all of whom lived in Battersea, and all of whose names began with a C. It seems that they always summon jurymen in this sweeping alphabetical way. At one official blow, so to speak, Battersea is denuded of all its C's, and left to get on as best it can with the rest of the alphabet. A cumber-patch is missing from one street, a chisel-pop from another, 3 Chucksterfields from Chucksterfield House. The children are crying out for an absent Cadgerboy. The woman at the street corner is weeping for her coffin-top, and will not be comforted. We settle down with a rollicking ease into our seats, for we are a bold, devil-may-care race, the C's of Battersea, and an oath is administered to us in a totally inaudible manner by an individual resembling an army surgeon in his second childhood. We understand, however, that we are to well and truly try the case between our sovereign lord the King and the prisoner at the bar, neither of whom has put in an appearance as yet. Just when I was wondering whether the King and the prisoner were, perhaps, coming to an amicable understanding in some adjoining public house, the prisoner's head appears above the barrier of the dock. He is accused of stealing bicycles, and he is the living image of a great friend of mine. We go into the matter of the stealing of the bicycles. We do well and truly try the case between the King and the prisoner in the affair of the bicycles, and we come to the conclusion, after a brief but reasonable discussion, that the King is not in any way implicated. Then we pass on to a woman who neglected her children, and who looks as if somebody or something had neglected her. And I am one of those who fancy that something had. All the time that the eye took in these light appearances and the brain passed these light criticisms, there was in the heart a barbaric pity and fear which men have never been able to utter from the beginning, but which is the power behind half the poems of the world. The mood cannot even adequately be suggested, except faintly, by this statement that tragedy is the highest expression of the infinite value of human life. Never had I stood so close to pain, and never so far away from pessimism. Ordinarily I should not have spoken of these dark emotions at all, for speech about them is too difficult. But I mention them now for a specific and particular reason, to the statement of which I will proceed at once. I speak these feelings because out of the furnace of them there came a curious realization of a political or social truth. I saw with a queer and indescribable kind of clearness what a jury really is, and why we must never let it go. The trend of our epoch up to this time has been consistently towards specialism and professionalism. We tend to have trained soldiers because they fight better, trained singers because they sing better, trained dancers because they dance better, specially instructed laughers because they laugh better, and so on and so on. The principle has been applied to law and politics by innumerable modern writers. Many Fabians have insisted that a greater part of our political work should be performed by experts. Many legalists have declared that the untrained jury should be altogether supplanted by the trained judge. Now, if this world of ours were really what is called reasonable, I do not know that there would be any fault to find with this. But the true result of all experience and the true foundation of all religion is this, that the 4 or 5 things that it is most practically essential that a man should know are all of them what people call paradoxes. That is to say, that though we all find them in life to be mere plain truths, yet we cannot easily state them in words without being guilty of seeming verbal contradictions. One of them, for instance, is the unimpeachable platitude that the man who finds most pleasure for himself is often the man who least hunts for it. Another is the paradox of courage, the fact that the way to avoid death is not to have too much aversion to it. Whoever is careless enough of his bones to climb some hopeful cliff above the tide may save his bones by that carelessness. Whoever will lose his life, the same shall save it. An entirely practical and prosaic statement. Now, one of these 4 or 5 paradoxes which should be taught to every infant prattling at his mother's knee is the following: that the more a man looks at a thing, the less he can see it, and the more a man learns a thing, the less he knows it. The Fabian argument of the expert, that the man who is trained should be the man who is trusted, would be absolutely unanswerable if it were really true that a man who studied a thing and practised it every day went on seeing more and more of its significance. But he does not. He goes on seeing less and less of its significance. In the same way, alas, we all go on every day, unless we are continually goading ourselves into gratitude and humility, seeing less and less of the significance of the sky or the stones. Now it is a terrible business to mark a man out for the vengeance of men, but it is a thing to which a man can grow accustomed, as he can to other terrible things. He can even grow accustomed to the sun. And the horrible thing about all legal officials, even the best, about all judges, magistrates, barristers, detectives, and policemen, is not that they are wicked. Some of them are good. Not that they are stupid. Several of them are quite intelligent. It is simply that they have got used to it. Strictly, they do not see the prisoner in the dock. All they see is the usual man in the usual place. They do not see the awful court of judgment. They only see their own workshop. Therefore the instinct of Christian civilization has most wisely declared that into their judgments there shall upon every occasion be infused fresh blood and fresh thoughts from the streets. Men shall come in who can see the court and the crowd, and coarse faces of the policemen and the professional criminals, the wasted faces of the wastrels, the unreal faces of the gesticulating counsel, and see it all as one sees a new picture or a play hitherto unvisited. Our civilization has decided, and very justly decided, that determining the guilt or innocence of men is a thing too important to be trusted to trained men. It wishes for light upon that awful matter. It asks men who know no more law than I know, but who can feel the things that I felt in the jury box. When it wants a library catalogued, or the solar system discovered, or any trifle of that kind, it uses up specialists, but when it wishes anything done which is really serious, it collects 12 of the ordinary men standing round. The same thing was done, if I remember right, by the founder of Christianity. End of 12 Men, by G.K. Chesterton.
Chapter 12 of 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 12 of 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. Edwin Epps, of whom much will be said during the remainder of this history, is a large, portly, heavy-bodied man with light hair, high cheekbones, and a Roman nose of extraordinary dimensions. He has blue eyes, a fair complexion, and is, as I should say, full 6 feet high. He has the sharp, inquisitive expression of a jockey. His manners are repulsive and coarse, and his language gives speedy and unequivocal evidence that he has never enjoyed the advantages of an education. He has the faculty of saying most provoking things, in that respect even excelling old Peter Tanner. At the time I came into his possession, Edwin Epps was fond of the bottle, his sprees sometimes extending over the space of 2 whole weeks. Latterly, however, he had reformed his habits, and when I left him was as strict a specimen of temperance as could be found on Bayou Boeuf. When in his cups, Master Epps was a roistering, blustering, noisy fellow, whose chief delight was in dancing with his niggers, or lashing them about the yard with his long whip, just for the pleasure of hearing them screech and scream, as the great welts were planted on their backs. When sober, he was silent, reserved, and cunning, not beating us indiscriminately, as in his drunken moments, but sending the end of his rawhide to some tender spot of a lagging slave, with a sly dexterity peculiar to himself. He had been a driver and overseer in his younger years, but at this time was in possession of a plantation on Bayou Huff Power, 2½ miles from Holmesville, 18 from Marksville, and 12 from Cheneyville. It belonged to Joseph B. Roberts, his wife's uncle, and was leased by Epps. His principal business was raising cotton, and inasmuch as some may read this book who have never seen a cotton field, a description of the manner of its culture may not be out of place. The ground is prepared by throwing up beds or ridges with the plow. Back furrowing, it is called. Oxen and mules, the latter almost exclusively, are used in plowing. The women, as frequently as the men, perform this labor, feeding, currying, and taking care of their teams, and in all respects doing the field and stable work, precisely as do the plowboys of the North. The beds, or ridges, are 6 feet wide, that is, from water furrow to water furrow. A plow drawn by 1 mule is then run along the top of the ridge or center of the bed, making the drill, into which a girl usually drops the seed, which she carries in a bag hung round her neck. Behind her comes a mule and harrow, covering up the seed, so that 2 mules, 3 slaves, a plow, and harrow are employed in planting a row of cotton. This is done in the months of March and April. Corn is planted in February. When there are no cold rains, the cotton usually makes its appearance in a week. In the course of 8 or 10 days afterwards the first hoeing is commenced. This is performed in part, also, by the aid of the plow and mule. The plow passes as near as possible to the cotton on both sides, throwing the furrow from it. Slaves follow with their hoes, cutting up the grass and cotton, leaving hills 2½ feet apart. This is called scraping cotton. In 2 weeks more commences the second hoeing. This time the furrow is thrown towards the cotton. Only 1 stalk, the largest, is now left standing in each hill. In another fortnight it is hoed the 3rd time, throwing the furrow towards the cotton in the same manner as before, and killing all the grass between the rows. About the 1st of July, when it is a foot high or thereabouts, it is hoed the 4th and last time. Now the whole space between the rows is plowed, leaving a deep water furrow in the center. During all these hoeings the overseer or driver follows the slaves on horseback with a whip, such as has been described. The faster hoer takes the lead row. He is usually about a rod in advance of his companions. If one of them passes him, he is whipped. If one falls behind or is a moment idle, he is whipped. In fact, the lash is flying from morning until night, the whole day long. The hoeing season thus continues from April until July, a field having no sooner been finished once than it is commenced again. In the latter part of August begins the cotton picking season. At this time each slave is presented with a sack. A strap is fastened to it, which goes over the neck, holding the mouth of the sack pressed high. while the bottom reaches nearly to the ground. Each one is also presented with a large basket that will hold about 2 barrels. This is to put the cotton in when the sack is filled. The baskets are carried to the field and placed at the beginning of the rows. When a new hand, one unaccustomed to the business, is sent for the first time into the field, he is whipped up smartly and made for that day to pick as fast as he can possibly. At night it is weighed, so that his capability in cotton picking is known. He must bring in the same weight each night following. If it falls short, it is considered evidence that he has been a laggard, and a greater or less number of lashes is the penalty. An ordinary day's work is 200 pounds. A slave who is accustomed to picking is punished if he or she brings in a less quantity than that. There is a great difference among them as regards this kind of labor. Some of them seem to have a natural knack, or quickness, which enables them to pick with great celerity, and with both hands, while others, with whatever practice or industry, are utterly unable to come up to the ordinary standard. Such hands are taken from the cotton field and employed in other business. Patsy, of whom I shall have more to say, was known as the most remarkable cotton picker on Bayou Boeuf. She picked with both hands and with such surprising rapidity that 500 pounds a day was not unusual for her. Each one is tasked, therefore, according to his picking abilities, none, however, to come short of 200 weight. I, being unskilled always in that business, would have satisfied my master by bringing in the latter quantity, while, on the other hand, Patsy would surely have been beaten if she failed to produce twice as much. The cotton grows from 5 to 7 feet high, each stalk having a great many branches, shooting out in all directions, and lapping each other above the water furrow. There are few sights more pleasant to the eye than a wide cotton field when it is in the bloom. It presents an appearance of purity, like an immaculate expanse of light, new fallen snow. Sometimes the slave picks down one side of a row and back upon the other, but more usually there is one on either side, gathering all that has blossomed, leaving the unopened bolls for a succeeding picking. When the sack is filled, it is emptied into the basket and trodden down. It is necessary to be extremely careful the first time going through the field, in order not to break the branches off the stalks. The cotton will not bloom upon a broken branch. Eppes never failed to inflict the severest chastisement on the unlucky servant who, either carelessly or unavoidably, was guilty in the least degree in this respect. The hands are required to be in the cotton field as soon as it is light in the morning, and with the exception of 10 or 15 minutes, which is given them at noon to swallow their allowance of cold bacon, they are not permitted to be a moment idle until it is too dark to see, and when the moon is full. They oftentimes labor till the middle of the night. They do not dare to stop even at dinner time, nor return to the quarters, however late it be, until the order to halt is given by the driver. The day's work over in the field, the baskets are toted, or, in other words, carried to the gin house, where the cotton is weighed. No matter how fatigued and weary he may be, no matter how much he longs for sleep and rest, a slave never approaches the gin house with his basket of cotton but with fear. If it falls short in weight, if he has not performed the full task appointed him, he knows that he must suffer. And if he has exceeded it by 10 or 20 pounds, in all probability his master will measure the next day's task accordingly. So, whether he has too little or too much, his approach to the gin house is always with fear and trembling. Most frequently they have too little, and therefore it is they are not anxious to leave the field. After weighing follow the whippings, and then the baskets are carried to the cotton house and their contents stored away like hay, all hands being sent in to tramp it down. If the cotton is not dry, instead of taking it to the gin house at once, it is laid upon platforms 2 feet high, and some 3 times as wide, covered with boards or plank, with narrow walks running between them. This done, the labor of the day is not yet ended, by any means. Each one must then attend to his respective chores. One feeds the mules, another the swine, another cuts the wood, and so forth. Besides, the packing is all done by candlelight. Finally, at a late hour, they reach the quarters, sleepy and overcome with the long day's toil. Then a fire must be kindled in the cabin, the corn ground in the small hand mill, and supper and dinner for the next day in the field prepared. All that is allowed them is corn and bacon, which is given out at the corn crib and smoke house every Sunday morning. Each one receives, as his weekly allowance, 3½ pounds of bacon, and corn enough to make a peck of meal. That is all. No tea, coffee, sugar, and with the exception of a very scanty sprinkling now and then, no salt. I can say from a 10 years' residence with Master Epps that no slave of his is ever likely to suffer from the gout, superinduced by excessive high living. Master Epps' hogs were fed on shelled corn. It was thrown out to his niggers in the ear. The former, he thought, would fatten faster by shelling, and soaking it in the water. The latter, perhaps, if treated in the same manner, might grow too fat to labor. Master Epps was a shrewd calculator, and knew how to manage his own animals, drunk or sober. The corn mill stands in the yard beneath a shelter. It is like a common coffee mill, the hopper holding about 6 quarts. There was one privilege which Master Epps granted freely to every slave he had. They might grind their corn nightly, in such small quantities as their daily wants required, or they might grind the whole week's allowance at one time, on Sundays, just as they preferred. A very generous man was Master Epps. I kept my corn in a small wooden box, the meal in a gourd, and, by the way, the gourd is one of the most convenient and necessary utensils on a plantation. Besides supplying the place of all kinds of crockery in a slave cabin, it is used for carrying water to the fields. Another also contains the dinner. It dispenses with the necessity of pails, dippers, basins, and such tin and wooden superfluities altogether. When the corn is ground and fire is made, the bacon is taken down from the nail on which it hangs, a slice cut off and thrown upon the coals to broil. The majority of slaves have no knife, much less a fork. They cut the bacon with the axe at the woodpile. The corn meal is mixed with a little water, placed in the fire, and baked. When it is done brown, the ashes are scraped off, and being placed upon a chip which answers for a table, the tenant of the slave hut is ready to sit down upon the ground to supper. By this time it is usually midnight. The same fear of punishment with which they approach the gin house possesses them again on lying down to get a snatch of rest. It is the fear of oversleeping in the morning. Such an offense would certainly be attended with not less than 20 lashes. With a prayer that he may be on his feet and wide awake at the first sound of the horn, he sinks to his slumbers nightly. The softest couches in the world are not to be found in the log mansion of the slave. The one whereon I reclined year after year was a plank 12 inches wide and 10 feet long. My pillow was a stick of wood. The bedding was a coarse blanket, and not a rag or shred beside. Moss might be used, were it not that it directly breeds a swarm of fleas. The cabin is constructed of logs, without floor or window. The latter is altogether unnecessary, the crevices between the logs admitting sufficient light. In stormy weather the rain drives through them, rendering it comfortless and extremely disagreeable. The rude door hangs on great wooden hinges. In one end is constructed an awkward fireplace. An hour before daylight the horn is blown. Then the slaves arouse, prepare their breakfast, fill a gourd with water. in another deposit their dinner of cold bacon and corn cake, and hurry to the field again. It is an offence invariably followed by a flogging, to be found at the quarters after daybreak. Then the fears and labors of another day begin, and until its close there is no such thing as rest. He fears he will be caught lagging through the day. He fears to approach the gin house with his basket load of cotton at night. He fears when he lies down that he will oversleep himself in the morning. Such is a true, faithful, unexaggerated picture and description of the slave's daily life during the time of cotton picking on the shores of Bayou Boeuf. In the month of January, generally, the fourth and last picking is completed. Then commences the harvesting of corn. This is considered a secondary crop, and receives far less attention than the cotton. It is planted, as already mentioned, in February. Corn is grown in that region for the purpose of fattening hogs and feeding slaves, very little, if any, being sent to market. It is the white variety, the ear of great size, and the stalk growing to the height of 8 and oftentimes 10 feet. In August, the leaves are stripped off, dried in the sun, bound in small bundles, and stored away as provender for the mules and oxen. After this the slaves go through the field, turning down the ear, for the purpose of keeping the rains from penetrating to the grain. It is left in this condition until after cotton picking is over, whether earlier or later. Then the ears are separated from the stalks and deposited in the corn crib with the husks on. Otherwise, stripped of the husks, the weevil would destroy it. The stalks are left standing in the field. The Carolina, or sweet potato, is also grown in that region to some extent. They are not fed, however, to hogs or cattle, and are considered but of small importance. They are preserved by placing them upon the surface of the ground with a slight covering of earth or cornstalks. There is not a cellar on Bayou Boeuf. The ground is so low it would fill with water. Potatoes are worth from 2 to 3 bits of shillings a barrel. Corn, except when there is an unusual scarcity, can be purchased at the same rate. As soon as the cotton and corn crops are secured, the stalks are pulled up, thrown into piles and burned. The plows are started at the same time, throwing up the beds again, preparatory to another planting. The soil in the parishes of Rapides and Avoyelles, and throughout the whole country, so far as my observation extended, is of exceeding richness and fertility. It is a kind of marl, of a brown or reddish color. It does not require those invigorating composts necessary to more barren lands, and on the same field the same crop is grown for many successive years. Plowing, planting, picking cotton, gathering the corn, and pulling and burning stalks occupies the whole of the 4 seasons of the year. Drawing and cutting wood, pressing cotton, fattening and killing hogs, are but incidental labors. In the month of September or October the hogs are run out of the swamps by dogs, and confined in pens. On a cold morning, generally about New Year's Day, they are slaughtered. Each carcass is cut into 6 parts, and piled one above the other in salt, upon large tables in the smokehouse. In this condition it remains a fortnight, when it is hung up and a fire built, and continued more than half the time during the remainder of the year. This thorough smoking is necessary to prevent the bacon from becoming infested with worms. In so warm a climate it is difficult to preserve it, and very many times myself and my companions have received our weekly allowance of 3 pounds and a half when it was full of these disgusting vermin. Although the swamps are overrun with cattle, they are never made the source of profit to any considerable extent. The planter cuts his mark upon the ear, or brands his initials upon the side, and turns them into the swamps to roam unrestricted within their almost limitless confines. They are the Spanish breed, small and spike-horned. I have known of droves being taken from Bayou Boeuf, but it is of very rare occurrence. The value of the best cows is about $5 each. 2 quarts at one milking would be considered an unusual large quantity. They furnish little tallow, and that of a soft inferior quality. Notwithstanding the great number of cows that throng the swamps, the planters are indebted to the North for their cheese and butter, which is purchased in the New Orleans market. Salted beef is not an article of food either in the great house or in the cabin. Master Epps was accustomed to attend shooting matches for the purpose of obtaining what fresh beef he required. These sports occurred weekly at the neighboring village of Holmesville. Fat beeves are driven thither and shot at, a stipulated price being demanded for the privilege. The lucky marksman divides the flesh among his fellows, and in this manner the attending planters are supplied. The great number of tame and untamed cattle which swarmed the woods and swamps of Bayou Boeuf most probably suggested that appellation to the French, inasmuch as the term, translated, signifies the creek or river of the wild ox. Garden products, such as cabbages, turnips, and the like, are cultivated for the use of the master and his family. They have greens and vegetables at all times and seasons of the year. The grass withereth and the flower fadeth before the desolating winds of autumn in the chill northern latitudes, but perpetual verdure overspreads the hot lowlands, and flowers bloom in the heart of winter in the region of Bayou Boeuf. There are no meadows appropriated to the cultivation of the grasses. The leaves of the corn supply a sufficiency of food for the laboring cattle, while the rest provide for themselves all the year in the ever-growing pasture. There are many other peculiarities of climate, habit, custom, and of the manner of living and laboring at the South, but the foregoing, it is supposed, will give the reader an insight and general idea of life on a cotton plantation in Louisiana. The mode of cultivating cane and the process of sugar manufacturing will be mentioned in another place. End of Chapter 12 of 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. Reading by Matt Perard.
The Baker's Dozen, a Playlet, from Reginald in Russia and Other Sketches by Saki. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Our Cast of Characters.
Major Richard Dumbarton, read by Peter Yearsley.
Mrs. Carew, read by Devora Allen.
Mrs. Pally Paget, read by Sue Anderson.
And stage directions, read by Marianne. The scene. Deck of an eastward bound steamer. Major Dumbarton seated on a deck chair, another chair by his side, with the name Mrs. Carew painted on it, a third nearby. And to right, Mrs. Carew seats herself leisurely in her deck chair, the Major affecting to ignore her presence. The Major, turning suddenly.
Emily, after all these years, this is fate.
Fate? Nothing of the sort. It's only me. You men are always such fatalists. I deferred my departure 3 whole weeks in order to come out in the same boat that I saw you were travelling by. I bribed the steward to put out chairs side by side in an unfrequented corner, and I took enormous pains to be looking particularly attractive this morning, and then you say this is fate. I am looking particularly attractive, am I not?
More than ever. Time has only added a ripeness to your charms.
I knew you'd put it exactly in those words. The phraseology of love-making is awfully limited, isn't it? After all, the chief charm is in the fact of being made love to. You are making love to me, aren't you?
Emily, dearest, I had already begun making advances even before you sat down here. I also bribed the steward to put our seats together in a secluded corner. You may consider it done, sir, was his reply. That was immediately after breakfast.
How like a man to have his breakfast first. I attended to the seat business as soon as I left my cabin.
Don't be unreasonable. It was only at breakfast that I discovered your blessed presence on the boat. I paid violent and unusual attention to a flapper all through the meal, in order to make you jealous. She's probably in her cabin, writing reams about me to a fellow flapper at this very moment.
You needn't have taken all that trouble to make me jealous, Dickie. You did that years ago, when you married another woman.
Well, you had gone and married another man. A widower, too, at that.
Well, there's no particular harm in marrying a widower, I suppose. I'm ready to do it again, if I meet a really nice one.
Look here, Emily. It's not fair to go on at that rate. You're a lap ahead of me the whole time. It's my place to propose to you. All you've got to do is to say yes.
Well, I've practically said it already, so we needn't dawdle over that part.
Oh, well.
They look at each other, then suddenly embrace with considerable energy.
We dead heated it that time.
Suddenly jumping to his feet.
Oh, damn. I'd forgotten.
Forgotten what?
The children. I ought to have told you. Do you mind children?
Not in moderate quantities. How many have you got?
Counting hurriedly on his fingers.
5.
5?
Is that too many?
It's rather a number. The worst of it is, I've some myself.
Many?
8.
8 in 6 years? Oh, Emily.
Only 4 were my own. The other 4 were by my husband's first marriage. Still, that practically makes 8.
And 8 and 5 make 13. We can't start our married life with 13 children. It would be most unlucky.
Walks up and down in agitation.
Some way must be found out of this. If we could only bring them down to 12. 13 is so horribly unlucky.
Isn't there some way by which we could part with 1 or 2? Don't the French want more children? I've often seen articles about it in the Figaro.
I fancy they want French children. Mine don't even speak French.
There's always a chance that one of them might turn out depraved and vicious, and then you could disown him. I've heard of that being done.
But, good gracious, you've got to educate him first. You can't expect a boy to be vicious till he's been to a good school.
Why couldn't he be naturally depraved? Lots of boys are.
Only when they inherit it from depraved parents. You don't suppose there's any depravity in me, do you?
It sometimes skips a generation, you know. Weren't any of your family bad?
There was an aunt who was never spoken of.
There you are.
But one can't build too much on that. In mid-Victorian days they labelled all sorts of things as unspeakable that we should speak about quite tolerantly. I dare say this particular aunt had only married a Unitarian, or rode to hounds on both sides of her horse, or something of that sort. Anyway, we can't wait indefinitely for one of the children to take after a doubtfully depraved great-aunt. Something else must be thought of.
Don't people ever adopt children from other families?
I've heard of it being done by childless couples and those sort of people.
Hush, someone's coming. Who is it?
Mrs. Paley Paget.
The very person.
What, to adopt a child? Hasn't she got any?
Only one miserable hen baby.
Let's sound her on the subject.
Enter Mrs. Paley Paget. Right.
Ah, good morning, Mrs. Paley Paget. I was just wondering at breakfast, where did we meet last?
At the Criterion, wasn't it?
Drops into vacant chair.
At the Criterion, of course.
I was dining with Lord and Lady Slugford. Charming people, but so mean. They took us afterwards to the Velodrome to see some dancer interpreting Mendelssohn's Song Without Clothes. We were all packed up in a little box near the roof, and you can imagine how hot it was. It was like a Turkish bath, and of course one couldn't see anything.
Then it was not like a Turkish bath.
Major.
We were just talking of you when you joined us.
Really? Nothing very dreadful, I hope.
Oh dear, no. It's too early on the voyage for that sort of thing. We were feeling rather sorry for you.
Sorry for me? Whatever for?
Your childless hearth and all that, you know. No little pattering feet.
Major, how dare you? I've got my little girl, I suppose you know. Her feet can patter as well as other children's."
Only one pair of feet.
"Certainly. My child isn't a centipede. Considering the way they move us about in those horrid jungle stations without a decent bungalow to set one's foot in, I consider I've got a hearthless child rather than a childless hearth. Thank you for your sympathy all the same. I dare say it was well meant. Impertinence often is."
Dear Mrs. Paget, we were only feeling sorry for your sweet little girl when she grows older, you know. No little brothers and sisters to play with.
"Mrs. Carew, this conversation strikes me as being indelicate, to say the least of it. I've only been married 2½ years, and my family is naturally a small one."
Isn't it rather an exaggeration to talk of one little female child as a family? A family suggests numbers.
"Really, Major, your language is extraordinary. I dare say I've only got a little female child, as you call it, at present."
Oh, it won't change into a boy later on, if that's what you're counting on. Take our word for it. We've had so much more experience in these affairs than you have. Once a female, always a female. Nature is not infallible, but she always abides by her mistakes.
Rising.
"Major Dumbarton, these boats are uncomfortably small, but I trust we shall find ample accommodation for avoiding each other's society during the rest of the voyage. The same wish applies to you, Mrs. Carew."
Exit Mrs. Paget left.
What an unnatural mother!
Sinks into a chair.
I wouldn't trust a child with anyone who had a temper like hers. Oh, Dickie, why did you go and have such a large family? You always said you wanted me to be the mother of your children.
I wasn't going to wait while you were founding and fostering dynasties in other directions. Why you couldn't be content to have children of your own without collecting them like batches of postage stamps, I can't think. The idea of marrying a man with 4 children.
Well, you're asking me to marry one with 5.
5?
Springing to his feet.
Did I say 5?
You certainly said 5.
Oh, Emily, supposing I've miscounted them. Listen now, keep count with me. Richard, that's after me, of course.
1.
Albert Victor, that must have been in coronation year.
2.
Maud, she's called after...
Never mind who she's called after. 3.
And Gerald.
4.
That's the lot.
Are you sure?
I swear that's the lot. I must have counted Albert Victor as 2.
Richard.
Emily.
They embrace. End of The Baker's Dozen. "12 Profitable Sonnets" by Archibald MacMakin. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. A Young Bride, to Margaret Bingay. Slight, with the grace of lilies in the dew, pale golden hair, truth-telling lips, and eyes of the May heaven's softest, kindliest blue, winsome and tender, gravely sweet and wise. A nature fine, compact of harmonies, which, with the growing years in measure grew to a new depth, a richness ever new, and from which fuller melody shall rise. Now those who love you, and have longest known your soft perfections in their sweetness all, pray that God's blessing on your head may fall in passing 'neath a roof-tree of your own, that small fair head, so comely and so bright, to be its centre and its guiding light. The Happy Mother, to Mabel Wesson Murray. A stooping lady, tall and finely made, in music skilled, in mother learning wise, moves through a mansion under English skies, in strangely trailing, glittering robes arrayed. She hath a secret which is soon betrayed. It may be read by all without disguise in those grey, kindly, understanding eyes, that ne'er for speech need call the lips to aid. Across the seas, that lady dear to greet, a whilom guest sends kindest thoughts to-day, seeing a picture where the sunlight falls upon a path by lavender made sweet, where happy children circle in their play the happy mother by the abbey walls. Halfway House. O little house of laughter and of tears, whose walls have known wed lovers whispering low, lips seeking lips beside the hearth fire's glow, wailing of birth pangs, nights of chilling fears, and babbling children's clamour, which endears even their bickering and short-lived woe, and hush of death, the triumph of the foe. Blessed be thy roof-tree through the coming years. What is to come I know not. To divine of doubtful joy, inevitable pain is never wisdom. But for what is mine beyond recall, the usual loss and gain, that on the steps of mortal man attend. Blessed be thy roof-tree till the very end. Any husband to any wife. Often as I have failed you in the past, by word of love kept back, defrauded you, by thought unshared, deprived you of your due, much more by overt fault, have seemed to cast doubt on the loyal bond that holds us fast. For all I ever did to make you rue, all ever left undone to prove me true, grant me the kiss of pardon at long last. Let us join hands once more as old allies, to bind together the swift year's assault. Knowing they must o'ercome us, soon or late, there is yet time allotted to be wise. Repledge our faith, our love rededicate, haply more strong for failure and for fault. With a carcanet. In her excellent white bosom these. Christmas brings gifts, and here is mine to you, a linked trifle of the goldsmith's art, to lie on gaudy nights above your heart. The richest treasure were your simple due, and this poor toy is mean to outward view. Yet take it as a token on my part, of old, old vows, which, oft repeated, start the old, old love coursing in channels new. Think of it, dearest, as an amulet, with power to ward off harm from your white breast, and these strange pebbles gleaming with red fire, as thoughts of mine that constantly beset your heart in tender siege, and will not rest until they reach the goal of their desire. Absent Friends. To George Morby Acklam. Before the simple Christmas banquet ends, the happy faces round about the board, in their glad babble, turn with one accord, where on his feet the smiling host attends the pause for silence. Then, his head he bends, raises on high the cup that he has poured, a loving cup, with memories crowned and stored, and gives the final pledge, to absent friends. God bless them all, whether to east or west, across the ranges or beyond the sea, the dear old friends have vanished from our sight. Wherever they have found a place of rest, it is not possible that they should be beyond the reach of loving thoughts tonight. Christmas, 1913. Drear is our Yuletide. To Mabel Corey. Drear is our Yuletide. With a double gloom begins and ends the bleak December day. For darkly lowers the universal fray, and heaven high the storms of battle loom. The cold of winter, with its icy broom is doubly chill by the tyrannical sway of shivering fears that nothing can allay, freezing the blood with vapors from the tomb. Still, as the season of the wondrous birth draws on once more, and each beloved name stirs in the recollection, let us haste to light o'er all this cold and darkened earth the little fire of friendship mid the waste, and warm our hearts before the sacred flame. Christmas, 1914. The floodgates burst. To the memory of George Henderson Campbell. The floodgates burst, and forth the deluge tore of blood in seas, torrents of widow tears, high billowing anguish, overwhelming fears, outrage and cruelty unknown before, and such black shame as devils might deplore, and storms of lamentation smote all ears for ravage past the cure of coming years. The deluge drowned the world. Men call it war. One thing remains. Ever about this time the Christian legend tells of love made flesh, of God himself to this low world come down, there being need to teach the world afresh, that many waters quench not love sublime, nor all the floods from broken floodgates drown. Hope and Fear. To Dr. John Stuart. Fear spake to Hope, "My neighbour and my foe, in every breast it is our lot to dwell, waging, through doubtful years, a conflict fell, nor truce nor treaty can we ever know. But now I glory in thine overflow. My brother Hate and I have cast our spell o'er all the earth, and turned it into hell. Therefore be thou Despair, thy very name forego." "My hour comes quickly," steadfast Hope replied. "Soon all the bells of earth for joy shall ring, to greet the birth of him who came to bring me to the earth, with triumph at his side. Poor was the roof above his manger bed, but wise men followed where his birth star led." Christmas, 1916. Eloquence. To Kathleen Burke. Erect, you faced the assembly, all in white, yourself a clear and vibrant silver flame of eager human feeling, set alight by human suffering and by human shame, and by the courage and the enduring will of those brave women who in distant lands tend broken soldiers with God-gifted skill, and carry comfort in their healing hands. You told your moving story with strange power, swaying all hearts with winged words and warm, while flashing countless glimpses in an hour on the sad wreckage of the war's wild storm. You came and went, intent on highest ends. Strangers you met, and left behind you friends. Loss and Gain. To James Metcalfe McCollum. The 4 dire years, forever marked blood red in time's dark calendar of human woe, are now with agonies of long ago. And we are free to miss and mourn our dead, and faintly breathe relief from torturing dread, to count our losses, and at length to know ourselves as henceforth poor here below. The worst of life draws on, the best is fled. Yet in despite of all the spoiler years, old friends, and true, and tested, still remain, who know our faults and love us none the less. And in this Christmas peace that heals and cheers, we clearly see their love as life's chief gain, and bless their names, and call on God to bless. Christmas, 1919. The Canadians at Ypres, April 22nd to 24th, 1915. To the memory of George William Stairs. They did all men could do. The smoke of hell caught at their throats, but could not force them back. The gray-coat foe charged hotly in the track swept by his iron hurricane of shell. resolved to win the sea-gate. None may tell the force he poured, attack on mad attack, on our brave few, as in the direst lack of every aid 3 days they fought and fell. But they endured. They held their blood-soaked ground. Between the sea-gate and the desperate foe, their thin, worn lines were adamantine bars. Therefore their names with honor shall be crowned in their dear land's fair story, not with woe, and in the record they shall shine like stars. End of 12 Profitable Sonnets by Archibald MacMechen.
A Robin's Nest, from 12 Months with the Birds and Poets, by Samuel A. Harper. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. With what alert and expectant ear do we await the first spring robin's call? With what a thrill of ecstasy do we hear his first spring song? I never find it necessary to record in my notebook the date of the arrival of my first spring robin. I know the dates for years back. His cheery call means for me the beginning of a new year and forgetfulness of winter, as Thomas S. Jones so happily expresses it. You hold my winter in forgetfulness. Without my window lilac branches swing. Within my gate I hear a robin sing. And while the bluebird shares with the robin the glory of being our most common and most beloved April bird, when mid the budding elms the bluebird flits, as if a bit of sky had taken wings, he less often announces his arrival at our back door. He makes an occasional welcome visit to our lawn, or to a neighboring shrub or tree, but for the most part prefers the more open country, yet not too far removed from man and his habitations. But the robin seems to love the intimate companionship of man. He feeds in our home yards and sings in our trees and shrubs. He often builds his nest on a projecting timber of house or barn. The attitude of the bird towards man is a sweet and singular mixture of friendliness and timidity. The natural instinct and art of all birds is to conceal their nests, both as to position and material. Yet the love of the robin for man's society has so far overcome his natural instinctive fear that he sometimes builds his nest on a window ledge or over the door of our dwelling. Why should we not return this affection, which on the part of the bird represents a conquest over its fear for man? This year of which I write, 1916, on April 1st, a pair of robins began bringing grass and mud to the ledge of a south second-story window of my suburban home, for the purpose of making a nest. It need hardly be said that they were not disturbed. I considered the house worth an extra $1,000 at least with this addition. Joyce Kilmer suggests the added glory that comes to a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair. The window shade was carefully drawn so that the birds would not be disconcerted. While robins are usually not easily frightened out of their determination to build a nest in a particular place, and often fight for their right to choose the location of their domicile, we did not intend to run any risks of the birds changing their plans. All day, Saturday and Sunday, they were busy with their weaving and their masonry. The female, after depositing a circle of mud on the inside of the nest, would nestle into it and softly mold it into a cup by turning her breast round and round against its rim and churning her wings up and down to smooth its edges. I observed after one such process that she flew into a neighbor's yard and bathed herself in a basin of water on the lawn, washing the mud from her breast. My young son, who was greatly excited during these building operations, and who was with difficulty restrained from frightening and annoying the birds, asked if we could finish the nest if the birds became frightened and deserted it. And I know I answered him truly when I said that no one but a bird can build a nest. The birds are the oldest miners, masons, carpenters and builders, weavers and basket makers. What nice hand, with every implement and means of art, and 20 years' apprenticeship to boot, could make us such another. By Sunday night the nest was apparently finished and ready for its eggs, and then for 4 days no robin was seen to come near it. Our household, from young son to grandmother, took on a worried look. Had the nest been abandoned? My explanation to an anxious family was that the robins, being experienced masons, knew that the wet mud of the nest was no fit receptacle for the eggs, and therefore the birds would wait until it dried. A more probable explanation for the 4 days' desertion of the new-built nest, however, is that the egg of Mother Robin was not yet ripe, and that the nest was therefore prepared too soon. Nature lovers, in their enthusiasm, are all too likely to attribute to birds and animals a wisdom and intelligence which they do not possess. Just as the beauty of the bird and its song is largely subjective, born of the spirit of the bird lover, so its acts, prompted solely by instinct, sense communications, and kindred influences, are often, in the subjective imagination of the enthusiastic nature student, mistaken for and miscalled judgment. If the mother robin really waited for the nest to become dry, it is more reasonable to assume that she waited from mere instinct, resulting from the sum total of the experience of herself and her ancestors in nest building, rather than that she had any conscious knowledge that a wet nest was not a good place for her eggs. Both the barn swallow and the phoebe, who employ mud in their nest building, frequently wait a day or two after the nest is finished before laying their eggs, which action might be attributed to instinctive solicitude for the future family. But this practice is not peculiar to birds who use mud in their nests, so that the delay is more likely due in each case to the fact that the egg is not mature. Mr. Burroughs relates a story of a creeping warbler whose egg became ripe before the nest was finished. After excavating the site for the nest, the bird laid the egg, and then finished the nest over it, so that if instinct sometimes errs upon the one side and fails to prompt the bird to build its nest in time, it may easily err on the other side and urge nest building too soon. But to return to our nest on the window ledge, whatever the reason may have been for her 4 days' absence, at the expiration of that time the female robin returned to the nest, and then laid 1 egg a day until 4 were in the nest, and as I write she is faithfully warming the nest and its eggs, and clamorously protesting when anyone appears at the window or at any window in the vicinity. End of A Robin's Nest, from 12 Months with the Birds and Poets, by Samuel A. Harper. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.
Chapter 12 of the Book of the 12 Begins, by Jan van Ruysbroek. 1293 to 1381. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 12 showeth forth the third mode of true contemplation. Hereafter followeth the third mode, which belongeth to the life of contemplation. This mode is called speculatio, that is to say, a seeing in a mirror. For indeed the understanding of him who is contemplating is as a living mirror, whereupon the Father and the Son breathe their spirit of truth, so that the reason may be enlightened, and may realize in modes, forms, images, and similitudes all truth that can be realized. But to that mode whereby we see the face of God beyond and without reason, in bare understanding, and in thoughts stripped of all images, neither consideration nor reasoning can attain. For just as the eagle, king of birds, can with his powerful sight gaze steadfastly upon the brightness of the sun, so do the weaker eyes of the bat fail and falter in the same. The pure and single eye of the soul, uplifted beyond and without reason, in a bare and simple vision, seeth always the face of the Father, as do the angels who are our ministers, for it hath before it no other image than that of God himself. In that moment it beholdeth God and all things, so far as they are one with God, in a simple seeing, and therewith it is content, and the name thereof is contemplatio. That is, the seeing of God in all simplicity. And so, in like manner, the intellectual power of the soul is a living mirror, wherein God dwelleth in grace, and whereto he hath given his Spirit of truth. And by his light the eye of reason is enlightened, to recognize God and all his creatures in their forms and images and similitudes, so far as he is pleased to manifest them. And the Spirit of God commandeth the reason, which it hath enlightened, to order and govern the life of the senses after his law and the ordinances of his holy church in love and true discretion. In the second place, he who hath understanding, and who hath received from God the Spirit of truth, shall walk before the face of our Lord, ruling and adorning his inward life with every virtue, according to the beloved will of God. And so may he hear the gentle voice of the Father speaking in his spirit, and saying, Look unto me, know me as I know thee, behold me from very close, what I am, and who I am. At this invitation the soul and all the inward powers rejoice, and she desireth at the urging and inviting of God to see with the eyes of her understanding opened and enlightened. And then he showeth himself to the soul of the living mirror in her intelligence, not as he is in his nature, but in images and similitudes, and in the degree in which the enlightened reason can grasp and understand him. And the wise reason, enlightened by God, seeth clearly and without error, in images of the understanding, all that which she hath heard of God, of faith, and of all truth, according to her desiring. But that image which is God himself, although it is held before her, she cannot comprehend, for the eyes of her understanding must fail before that incomparable light. Yet, because she is made wise by the Spirit of truth, so doth she see God in the images of her understanding as power, truth, justice, goodness, and mercy, compassion, abundance, and loving kindness, living faithfulness, consolation, and sweetness. She seeth also the distinction of the persons, that each is God, and each alike almighty in natural power, unity in Trinity, and Trinity in unity, in their nature fruitfulness, and in their essence pure repose, each person God, and the Godhead in their common substance. For the reason, which is enlightened by the Spirit of truth, seeth God in her mirror in as many modes, forms, and images as she can imagine, and in all the ways that she desireth. And now this power of the understanding is invited and urged by God to see what and who he is. And therefore crieth the contemplating soul, Lord, show us thy face above images and similitudes, uncovered and unveiled. So shall we be blessed indeed, and it shall be sufficient for us. And as the Spirit of the Lord answereth the enlightened reason and saith, Behold me, who and what I am, the eye of the understanding is strengthened to see all that it desireth, whereto it hath been urged of God. That simple eye, with clear gaze in the divine light, seeth plainly all that is God, and followeth after him in her desire to know and to conceive therein what and who God is. But before the face of our Lord, the reason with all her considerations and distinctions faileth, and this power of the understanding is uplifted into that which is beyond all modes, and its seeing is modeless, being without manner, and it is neither thus nor thus, neither here nor there, for that which hath no mode hath enveloped all, and the vision is made high and wide. It knoweth not itself where that is, which it seeth, and it cannot come thereat, for its seeing is modeless, and passeth on beyond forever and without return. That which it apprehendeth it cannot realize in full, nor wholly attain, for its apprehension is modeless and without manner, and therefore is it apprehended of God in a higher way than it can apprehend him. Lo, such a following of the way which is modeless is intermediary between contemplation in images and similitudes of the understanding, and unveiled contemplation beyond all images in the light of God. End of chapter 12 of the Book of the 12 Begins by Jan van Ruysbroek, 1293 to 1381.
The 12 Anathematisms of St. Cyril against Nestorius by St. Cyril of Alexandria. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1. If anyone will not confess that the Emmanuel is very God, and that therefore the Holy Virgin is the Mother of God, Theotokos, inasmuch as in the flesh she bore the Word of God made flesh, as it is written, the Word was made flesh, let him be anathema. 2. If any one shall not confess that the Word of God the Father is united hypostatically to flesh, and that with that flesh of his own he is one only Christ, both God and man, at the same time, let him be anathema. 3. If any one shall after the hypostatic union divide the hypostases in the one Christ, joining them by that connection alone, which happens according to worthiness, or even authority and power, and not rather by a coming together, synodo, which is made by natural union, enousin physikin, let him be anathema. 4. If any one shall divide between two persons or subsistences those expressions, phonas, which are contained in the evangelical and apostolical writings, or which have been said concerning Christ by the saints, or by himself, and shall apply some to him as to a man separate from the Word of God, and shall apply others to the only Word of God the Father, on the ground that they are fit to be applied to God, let him be anathema. 5. If any one shall dare to say that the Christ is a Theophorus, that is, God-bearing, man, and not rather that he is very God, as an only Son through nature, because the Word was made flesh, and hath a share in flesh and blood as we do, let him be anathema. 6. If any one shall dare say that the Word of God the Father is the God of Christ, or the Lord of Christ, and shall not rather confess him as at the same time both God and man, since according to the Scriptures, the Word was made flesh, let him be anathema. 7. If any one shall say that Jesus as man is only energized by the Word of God, and that the glory of the only begotten is attributed to him as something not properly his, let him be anathema. 8. If any one shall dare to say that the assumed man, analephthenta, ought to be worshipped together with God the Word, and glorified together with him, and recognized together with him as God, and yet as two different things, the one with the other, for this together with is added, that is to say, by the Nestorians, to convey this meaning, and shall not rather with one adoration worship the Emmanuel, and pay to him one glorification, as it is written, the Lord was made flesh, let him be anathema. 9. If any man shall say that the one Lord Jesus Christ was glorified by the Holy Ghost, so that he used through him a power not his own, and from him received power against unclean spirits, and power to work miracles before men, and shall not rather confess that it was his own Spirit through which he worked these divine signs, let him be anathema. 10. Whosoever shall say that it is not the Divine Word Himself, when He was made flesh and had become man as we are, but another than He, a man born of a woman, yet different from Him, ethikos anthropon, who is become our great High Priest and Apostle, or if any man shall say that He offered Himself in sacrifice for Himself, and not rather for us, whereas, being without sin, He had no need of offering or sacrifice, let him be anathema. 11. Whosoever shall not confess that the flesh of the Lord giveth life, and that it pertains to the Word of God the Father as his very own, but shall pretend that it belongs to another person who is united to him, that is to say, the Word, only according to honour, and who has served as a dwelling for the divinity, and shall not rather confess, as we say, that that flesh giveth life, because it is that of the Word who giveth life to all, let him be anathema. 12. Whosoever shall not recognize that the Word of God suffered in the flesh, that He was crucified in the flesh, and that likewise in that same flesh He tasted death, and that He is become the first begotten of the dead, for as He is God, He is the life, and it is He that giveth life, let him be anathema. End of the 12 anathematisms of Saint Cyril against Nestorius.
Rhapsody on a Windy Night by T.S. Eliot. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Rhapsody on a Windy Night by T.S. Eliot. 12 o'clock. Along the reaches of the street, held in a lunar synthesis, whispering lunar incantations dissolve the floors of memory, and all its clear relations, its divisions and precisions. Every street lamp that I pass beats like a fatalistic drum, and through the spaces of the dark, midnight shakes the memory as a madman shakes a dead geranium. 1:30. The street lamp sputtered, the street lamp muttered, the street lamp said,
Regard that woman who hesitates toward you in the light of the door, which opens on her like a grin. You see the border of her dress is torn and stained with sand, and you see the corner of her eye twists like a crooked pin. The memory throws up high and dry a crowd of twisted things, a twisted branch upon the beach, eaten smooth and polished, as if the world gave up the secret of its skeleton, stiff and white. A broken spring in a factory yard, rust that clings to the form that the strength has left, hard and curled and ready to snap. 2:30. The street lamp said, "Remark the cat which flattens itself in the gutter, slips out its tongue, and devours a morsel of rancid butter." So the hand of the child, automatic, slipped out and pocketed a toy that was running along the quay. I could see nothing behind that child's eye. I have seen eyes in the street, trying to peer through lighted shutters, and a crab one afternoon in a pool, an old crab with barnacles on his back, gripped the end of a stick which I held him. 3:30. The lamp sputtered, the lamp muttered in the dark, the lamp hummed, "Regarde the moon, la lune ne garde aucune rancune." She winks a feeble eye, she smiles into corners, she smooths the hair of the grass. The moon has lost her memory. A washed-out smallpox cracks her face. Her hand twists a paper rose that smells of dust and eau de cologne. She is alone, with all the old nocturnal smells that cross and cross across her brain. The reminiscence comes of sunless dry geraniums, and dust in crevices, smells of chestnuts in the street, and female smells in shuttered rooms, and cigarettes in corridors, and cocktail smells in bars. The lamp said, 4 o'clock. Here is the number on the door. Memory. You have the key. The little lamp spreads a ring on the stair. Mount. The bed is open. The toothbrush hangs on the wall. Put your shoes at the door. Sleep. Prepare for life. The last twist of the knife. End of Rhapsody on a Windy Night by T.S. Eliot. Read by Eva Davis.
The 12 Dancing Princesses, from The Red Fairy Book by Andrew Lang. This is a LibriVox recording read in honour of the 12th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time there lived in the village of Montigny-sur-Roc a little cowboy without either father or mother. His real name was Michael, but he was always called the Stargazer, because when he drove his cows over the commons to seek for pasture, he went along with his head in the air, gaping at nothing. As he had a white skin, blue eyes, and hair that curled all over his head, the village girls used to cry after him, "Well, Stargazer, what are you doing?" And Michael would answer, "Oh, nothing," and go on his way without even turning to look at them. The fact was, he thought them very ugly, with their sunburnt necks, their great red hands, their coarse petticoats, and their wooden shoes. He had heard that somewhere in the world there were girls whose necks were white and whose hands were small, who were always dressed in the finest silks and laces, and were called princesses. And while his companions round the fire saw nothing in the flames but common everyday fancies, he dreamed that he had the happiness to marry a princess. One morning, about the middle of August, just at midday when the sun was hottest, Michael ate his dinner of a piece of dry bread and went to sleep under an oak. And while he slept, he dreamt that there appeared before him a beautiful lady dressed in a robe of cloth of gold, who said to him, "Go to the castle of Belleisle, and there you shall marry a princess." That evening the little cowboy, who had been thinking a great deal about the advice of the lady in the gold dress, told his dream to the farm people, but, as was natural, they only laughed at the star-gazer. The next day at the same hour he went to sleep again under the same tree. The lady appeared to him a second time and said, "Go to the castle of Belial, and you shall marry a princess." In the evening Michael told his friends that he had dreamed the same dream again, but they only laughed at him more than before. "Never mind," he thought to himself. "If the lady appears to me a third time, I will do as she tells me." The following day, to the great astonishment of all the village, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a voice was heard singing, "Raleo, raleo, how the cattle go." It was the little cowboy driving his herd back to the byre. The farmer began to scold him furiously, but he answered quietly, "I am going away," made his clothes into a bundle, said good-bye to all his friends, and boldly set out to seek his fortunes. There was great excitement through all the village, and on the top of the hill the people stood holding their sides with laughing as they watched the star-gazer trudging bravely along the valley with his bundle at the end of his stick. It was enough to make anyone laugh, certainly. It was well known for full 20 miles round that there lived in the castle of Belial 12 princesses of wonderful beauty, and as proud as they were beautiful, and who were besides so very sensitive and of such truly royal blood that they would have felt at once the presence of a pea in their beds, even if the mattresses had been laid over it. It was whispered that they led exactly the lives that princesses ought to lead, sleeping far into the morning and never getting up till midday. They had 12 beds all in the same room, but what was very extraordinary was the fact that though they were locked in by triple bolts, every morning their satin shoes were found worn into holes. When they were asked what they had been doing all night, they always answered that they had been asleep, and indeed no noise was ever heard in the room, yet the shoes could not wear themselves out alone. At last the Duke of Belial ordered the trumpet to be sounded and a proclamation to be made that whoever could discover how his daughters wore out their shoes should choose one of them for his wife. On hearing the proclamation, a number of princes arrived at the castle to try their luck. They watched all night behind the open door of the princesses, but when the morning came they had all disappeared, and no one could tell what had become of them. When he reached the castle, Michael went straight to the gardener and offered his services. Now it happened that the garden boy had just been sent away, and though the star-gazer did not look very sturdy, the gardener agreed to take him, as he thought that his pretty face and golden curls would please the princesses. The first thing he was told was that when the princesses got up he was to present each one with a bouquet, and Michael thought that if he had nothing more unpleasant to do than that, he should get on very well. Accordingly, he placed himself behind the door of the princess's room with the 12 bouquets in a basket. He gave one to each of the sisters, and they took them without even deigning to look at the lad, except Lena, the youngest, who fixed her large black eyes as soft as velvet on him, and exclaimed, "Oh, how pretty he is, our new flower boy!" The rest all burst out laughing, and the eldest pointed out that a princess ought never to lower herself by looking at a garden boy. Now Michael knew quite well what had happened to the princes, but notwithstanding, the beautiful eyes of Princess Lena inspired him with a violent longing to try his fate. Unhappily, he did not dare to come forward, being afraid that he should only be jeered at, or even turned away from the castle on account of his impudence. Nevertheless, the star-gazer had another dream. The lady in the golden dress appeared to him once more, holding in one hand 2 young laurel trees, a cherry laurel and a rose laurel, and in the other hand a little golden rake, a little golden bucket, and a silken towel. She thus addressed him: "Plant these 2 laurels in 2 large pots, rake them over with the rake, water them with the bucket, and wipe them with the towel. When they have grown as tall as a girl of 15, say to each of them, 'My beautiful laurel, with the golden rake I have raked you, and with the golden bucket I have watered you, with the silken towel I have wiped you.' Then after that ask anything you choose, and the laurels will give it to you." Michael thanked the lady in the golden dress, and when he woke he found the 2 laurel bushes beside him. So he carefully obeyed the orders he had been given by the lady. The trees grew very fast, and when they were as tall as a girl of 15, he said to the cherry laurel, My lovely cherry laurel, with the golden rake I have raked thee, and with the golden bucket I have watered thee, and with the silken towel I have wiped thee. Teach me how to become invisible." Then there instantly appeared on the laurel a pretty white flower, which Michael gathered and stuck into his buttonhole. That evening, when the princesses went upstairs to bed, he followed them barefoot so that he might make no noise, and hid himself under one of the 12 beds, so as not to take up much room. The princesses began at once to open their wardrobes and boxes. They took out of them the most magnificent dresses, which they put on before their mirrors, and when they had finished, turned themselves all around to admire their appearances. Michael could see nothing from his hiding place, but he could hear everything, and he listened to the princesses laughing and jumping with pleasure. At last the eldest said, "Be quick, my sisters, our partners will be impatient." At the end of an hour, when the Stargazer heard no more noise, he peeped out and saw the 12 sisters in splendid garments, with their satin shoes on their feet, and in their hands the bouquets he had brought them. "Are you ready?" asked the eldest. "Yes," replied the other 11 in chorus, and they took their places one by one behind her. Then the eldest princess clapped her hands 3 times, and a trapdoor opened. All the princesses disappeared down a secret staircase, and Michael hastily followed them. As he was following on the steps of the Princess Lena, he carelessly trod on her dress. "There is somebody behind me!" cried the princess. "They are holding my dress!" "You foolish thing!" said her eldest sister. "You are always afraid of something. It is only a nail which caught you." They went down, 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 till at last they came to a passage with a door at one end, which was only fastened with a latch. The eldest princess opened it, and they found themselves immediately in a lovely little wood, where the leaves were spangled with drops of silver which shone in the brilliant light of the moon. They next crossed another wood, where the leaves were sprinkled with gold, and after another still, where the leaves glittered with diamonds. At last the Stargazer perceived a large lake, and on the shores of the lake 12 little boats with awnings, in which were seated 12 princes, who, grasping their oars, awaited the princesses. Each princess entered one of the boats, and Michael slipped into that which held the youngest. The boats glided along rapidly, but Lena's, from being heavier, was always behind the rest. "We never went so slowly before," said the princess. "What can be the reason?" "I don't know," answered the prince. "I assure you I am rowing as hard as I can." On the other side of the lake the garden boy saw a beautiful castle splendidly illuminated, whence came the lively music of fiddles, kettledrums, and trumpets. In a moment they touched land, and the company jumped out of the boats, and the princes, having securely fastened their barks, gave their arms to the princesses and conducted them to the castle. Michael followed, and entered the ballroom in their train. Everywhere were mirrors, lights, flowers, and damask hangings. The Stargazer was quite bewildered at the magnificence of the sight. He placed himself out of the way in a corner, admiring the grace and beauty of the princesses. Their loveliness was of every kind. Some were fair and some were dark. Some had chestnut hair, or curls darker still, and some had golden locks. Never were so many beautiful princesses seen together at one time. But the one whom the cowboy thought the most beautiful and the most fascinating was the little princess with the velvet eyes. With what eagerness she danced! Leaning on her partner's shoulder, she swept by like a whirlwind. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkled, and it was plain that she loved dancing better than anything else. The poor boy envied those handsome young men with whom she danced so gracefully, but he did not know how little reason he had to be jealous of them. The young men were really the princes who, to the number of 50 at least, had tried to steal the princess's secret. The princesses had made them drink something of a philtre, which froze the heart, and left nothing but the love of dancing. They danced on till the shoes of the princesses were worn into holes. When the cock crowed the 3rd time, the fiddles stopped, and a delicious supper was served by negro boys, consisting of sugared orange flowers, crystallized rose leaves, powdered violets, cracknels, wafers, and other dishes which are, as everyone knows, the favourite food of princesses. After supper the dancers all went back to their boats, and this time the Stargazer entered that of the eldest princess. They crossed again the wood with the diamond-spangled leaves, the wood with the gold-sprinkled leaves, and the wood whose leaves glittered with drops of silver. And as a proof of what he had seen, the boy broke a small branch from a tree in the last wood. Lena turned as she heard the noise made by the breaking of the branch. "What was that noise?" she said. "It was nothing," replied her eldest sister. "It was only the screech of a barn owl that roosts in one of the turrets at the castle." While she was speaking, Michael managed to slip in front, and running up the staircase, he reached the princess's room first. He flung open the window, and sliding down the vine which climbed up the wall, found himself in the garden just as the sun was beginning to rise, and it was time for him to set to his work. That day, when he made up the bouquets, Michael hid the branch with the silver drops in the nosegay intended for the youngest princess. When Lena discovered it, she was much surprised. However, she said nothing to her sisters, but as she met the boy by accident while she was walking under the shade of the elms, she suddenly stopped as if to speak to him, then, altering her mind, went on her way. The same evening the 12 sisters went again to the ball, and the stargazer again followed them and crossed the lake in Lena's boat. This time it was the prince who complained that the boat seemed very heavy. "It is the heat," replied the princess. "I too have been feeling very warm." During the ball she looked everywhere for the gardener's boy, but she never saw him. As they came back, Michael gathered a branch from the wood with the gold-spangled leaves, and now it was the eldest princess who heard the noise that it made in breaking. "It is nothing," said Lena, "only the cry of the owl which roosts in the turrets of the castle." As soon as she got up, she found the branch in her bouquet. When the sisters went down, she stayed a little behind and said to the cowboy, "Where does this branch come from?" "Your Royal Highness knows well enough," answered Michael. "So you have followed us?" "Yes, Princess." "How did you manage it? We never saw you." "I hid myself," replied the stargazer quietly. The princess was silent a moment and then said, "You know our secret? Keep it. Here is the reward of your discretion." And she flung the boy a purse of gold. "I do not sell my silence," answered Michael, and he went away without picking up the purse. For 3 nights Lena neither saw nor heard anything extraordinary. On the 4th she heard a rustling among the diamond-spangled leaves of the wood. That day there was a branch of the trees in her bouquet. She took the stargazer aside and said to him in a harsh voice, "You know what price my father has promised to pay for our secret?" "I know, Princess," answered Michael. "Don't you mean to tell him?" "That is not my intention." "Are you afraid?" "No, Princess." "What makes you so discreet, then?" But Michael was silent. Lena's sisters had seen her talking to the little garden boy and jeered at her for it. "What prevents you marrying him?" asked the eldest. "You would become a gardener too. It is a charming profession. You could live in a cottage at the end of the park and help your husband to draw up water from the well, and when we get up you could bring us our bouquets." The Princess Lena was very angry, and when the stargazer presented her bouquet she received it in a disdainful manner. Michael behaved most respectfully. He never raised his eyes to her, but nearly all day she felt him at her side without ever seeing him. One day she made up her mind to tell everything to her eldest sister. "What?" said she. "This rogue knows our secret and you never told me? I must lose no time in getting rid of him." "But how?" "Why, by having him taken to the Tower with the dungeons, of course." For this was the way that in old times beautiful princesses got rid of people who knew too much. But the astonishing part of it was that the younger sister did not seem at all to relish this method of stopping the mouth of the gardener's boy, who, after all, had said nothing to their father. It was agreed that the question should be submitted to the other 10 sisters. All were on the side of the eldest. Then the younger sister declared that if they laid a finger on the little garden boy, she would herself go and tell their father the secret of the holes in their shoes. At last it was decided that Michael should be put to the test, that they would take him to the ball, and at the end of supper would give him the philtre which was to enchant him like the rest. They sent for the stargazer and asked him how he had contrived to learn their secret, but still he remained silent. Then, in commanding tones, the elder sister gave him the order they had agreed upon. He only answered, "I will obey." He had really been present, invisible, at the council of princesses and had heard all, but he had made up his mind to drink of the philtre and sacrifice himself to the happiness of her he loved. Not wishing, however, to cut a poor figure at the ball by the side of the other dancers, he went at once to the laurels and said, My lovely rose laurel, with the golden rake I have raked thee, with the golden bucket I have watered thee, with a silken towel I have dried thee. Dress me like a prince." A beautiful pink flower appeared. Michael gathered it, and found himself in a moment clothed in velvet, which was as black as the eyes of the little princess, with a cap to match, a diamond aigrette, and a blossom of the rose laurel in his buttonhole. Thus dressed, he presented himself that evening before the Duke of Belle-Isle, and obtained leave to try and discover his daughter's secret. He looked so distinguished that hardly anyone would have known who he was. The 12 princesses went upstairs to bed. Michael followed them, and waited behind the open door till they gave the signal for departure. This time he did not cross in Lena's boat. He gave his arm to the eldest sister, danced with each in turn, and was so graceful that everyone was delighted with him. At last the time came for him to dance with the little princess. She found him the best partner in the world, but he did not dare to speak a single word to her. When he was taking her back to her place, she said to him in a mocking voice, "Here you are at the summit of your wishes. You are being treated like a prince." "Don't be afraid," replied the Star-Gazer gently. "You shall never be a gardener's wife." The little princess stared at him with a frightened face, and he left her without waiting for an answer. When the satin slippers were worn through, the fiddles stopped, and the negro boys set the table. Michael was placed next to the eldest sister, and opposite to the youngest. They gave him the most exquisite dishes to eat, and the most delicate wines to drink, and in order to turn his head more completely, compliments and flattery were heaped upon him from every side. But he took care not to be intoxicated, either by the wine or the compliments. At last the eldest sister made a sign, and one of the black pages brought in a large golden cup. "The enchanted castle has no more secrets for you," she said to the Star-Gazer. "Let us drink to your triumph." He cast a lingering glance at the little princess, and without hesitation lifted the cup. "Don't drink!" suddenly cried out the little princess. "I would rather marry a gardener." And she burst into tears. Michael flung the contents of the cup behind him, sprang over the table, and fell at Lena's feet. The rest of the princes fell likewise at the knees of the princesses, each of whom chose a husband and raised him to her side. The charm was broken. The 12 couples embarked in the boats, which crossed back many times in order to carry over the other princes. Then they all went through the 3 woods, and when they had passed the door of the underground passage, a great noise was heard, as if the enchanted castle was crumbling to the earth. They went straight to the room of the Duke of Belle-Isle, who had just awoken. Michael held in his hand the golden cup, and he revealed the secret of the holes in the shoes. "Choose, then," said the Duke, "whichever you prefer." "My choice is already made," replied the garden boy, and he offered his hand to the youngest princess, who blushed and lowered her eyes. The Princess Lena did not become a gardener's wife. On the contrary, it was the Star-Gazer who became a prince. But before the marriage ceremony, the princess insisted that her lover should tell her how he came to discover the secret. So he showed her the 2 laurels which had helped him, and she, like a prudent girl, thinking they gave him too much advantage over his wife, cut them off at the root and threw them in the fire. And this is why the country girls go about singing "Nous n'irons plus boire, les lauriers sont coupés," and dancing in summer by the light of the moon. End of the 12 Dancing Princesses.